She slapped me in front of everyone. I was kneeling, scrubbing the floor of her kitchen, trying to clean a stain that wouldn't come out. Then I felt it. A sharp sting across my cheek, and the laughter that followed. Not one person said a word to stop her. I stared at the tiles, my palms flat against the wet ground, burning with shame. My ears rang, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. Because crying meant I still had something left to break. And then the door opened. My son stepped in, his boots still dusty from deployment. His eyes landed on me, then on her. And everything stopped. Stay with me till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. I was on my knees with a sponge in one hand and a bucket of lukewarm water beside me. My back ached, my knees screamed, and I could barely keep my balance. But I kept scrubbing not because the floor was dirty, but because she told me to do it again. She stood above me in her heels, arms crossed, a glass of champagne in one hand. Do it right this time? You missed a spot. She didn't say it quietly. Her voice cut through the buzz of laughter and clinking glasses like a whip. People turned. Some stared. Some giggled behind their flutes. I looked up thinking maybe she'd laugh it off. Maybe she was joking. But her face was cold. She wasn't smiling. I dipped the sponge back into the bucket and wiped the same corner again. My hands were shaking. I felt the heat rise to my face. My ears were ringing not from noise, but from humiliation. I could feel their eyes on my back, on my gray hair, on my old hands. You really don't learn, do you? Before I could respond, before I could even lift my head, her hand struck my face. A sharp, open-handed slap. It echoed, not just in the room, but inside my chest. My cheek burned. My breath caught. I didn't move. I couldn't. Someone gasped. But no one stepped forward. No one stopped her. She tossed her hair, turned to her friends, and laughed. Loud. Carefree. Like she'd just stepped out of a reality show and into her own spotlight. The room joined her. Polite laughter at first. Then louder. It wasn't the laughter that hurt the most. It was the silence in between, the kind that made you feel small, invisible, ridiculous. I stayed on the floor, hands wet, fingers pruned. I could have stood up. I could have yelled. But my voice had packed its bags and left me long ago. All I could do was sit there and try to swallow the knot in my throat. I looked toward the kitchen, hoping to disappear into it, just melt into the cabinets and vanish. But before I could move, I heard a sound I hadn't heard in months. The front door opened. I turned, still on my knees. Boots. Black. Polished. I knew those boots. I had cleaned them before he left. My son stepped inside. Brian. He stood tall in uniform, his duffel still over one shoulder. His eyes scanned the room, then dropped to me, still crouched on the floor, cheek red, sponge limp in my hand. He didn't speak. Not right away. Heather froze. The room fell quiet. Even the music seemed to hush itself. Brian walked in slow and heavy, like his boots carried the weight of every memory we'd shared. He looked around, saw the spilled champagne, the shock on faces, the guilt, the embarrassment, the confusion. Then his eyes landed on Heather. What the hell is going on here? His voice was low, firm. Not angry, not loud. Just enough to cut through every lie and every fake smile in that room. Heather blinked, tried to laugh. Just a misunderstanding, she said. Just a little help. But no one was listening anymore. Not even herself. Brian dropped his duffel to the floor. It hit with a heavy thud. He walked toward me, slow and sure. His hands reached out gentle, like he was touching something fragile. "Mom, stand up." I didn't. Not yet. I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't feel much at all. Just the heat on my face and the cold edge of humiliation curling around my ribs. I had waited for him. I had waited so long. But I had never imagined he'd come back to this. Not to this. Not to me, kneeling like a stranger in my own family. Not to me, silent in the house where my voice used to matter. Not to a room full of people who saw nothing wrong with a woman being slapped like a child in front of guests. But he came. And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. Not in the room. In me. 2 weeks ago, I buried my husband. His name was Edward. We had been married for 43 years. He was a quiet man, the kind who never raised his voice but somehow always had the last word. Cancer took him slowly and cruelly. It started in his lungs, then crawled through his bones until there was nothing left to fight with. I watched the man I loved turn into someone I couldn't recognize. And I watched the bills pile up until the hospital stopped calling and just started sending letters with red stamps. By the time he passed, the house was already on the market. I didn't have the energy to protest. I just signed where they told me to sign. We had no savings left. No pension. Only one son. Brian. He had enlisted 3 years ago, right after marrying Heather. He was deployed not long after that. I never blamed him for not being there. He wrote when he could. He sent money home. But nothing prepares you for being truly alone. After the funeral, Heather offered to let me stay at her parents' house. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like I should be grateful someone still remembered my name. I had nowhere else to go. So I moved in. It wasn't my home? Not even close. The wallpaper was floral, the carpets too thick, and the air always smelled faintly of cinnamon and disapproval. Heather's mother, Sharon, had a way of smiling that felt more like a warning than a welcome. They gave me the guest room in the basement. The mattress was hard and dipped in the middle. The ceiling was low, and there were no windows. Still, I told myself it was only temporary. I told myself to be thankful. The first week, I kept to myself. I cooked dinner once or twice to be helpful. I cleaned the kitchen when no one asked. I folded laundry that wasn't mine. It was just little things. Ways to earn my keep. By the second week, it wasn't a choice anymore. Heather began leaving notes. Wipe the counters. Vacuum the stairs. Re-wash the dishes. She said it was just to keep things organized. But the list kept growing. One morning, I came upstairs to find Sharon already dressed in her best Sunday clothes, sipping coffee like it was a performance. She looked me over and said nothing, just slid a basket of clothes toward me. They were hers. I did them anyway. I tried not to take it personally. I reminded myself it was only for a little while. I told myself that being useful was better than being in the way. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was no longer Grace, the wife, the mother, the woman who once taught music at the elementary school. I was just a burden in someone else's house. A quiet presence people stepped around. A pair of hands that folded towels and scrubbed toilets and disappeared into the background. I didn't ask for more. I didn't complain. Not even when they left me off the dinner plans. Not even when they used my car and left it empty. Brian's voice on the phone was always cheerful. I didn't tell him anything. What could I say that his mother was living in a basement and being treated like a stranger, that I scrubbed dishes while his wife threw dinner parties? I didn't want to be the reason he worried. He was fighting a war overseas. I was just trying to survive a smaller one at home. And I thought I could do it quietly. I thought if I kept my head down and stayed useful, they'd at least see me. But I was wrong. They didn't see me. Not until the moment I was on my knees in the middle of their living room. Not until she raised her hand in front of everyone. Not until the slap echoed louder than anything I'd ever said. That was when they looked. But by then, it was too late. I had already disappeared. It didn't start with shouting. There were no slammed doors or angry outbursts. It began with the little things. The kinds of things no one else would notice. The kinds of things that made you question yourself instead of the person doing them. One morning, I had just finished cleaning the kitchen. I wiped down every counter, swept under the table, even polished the stainless steel sink until I could see my reflection. Heather walked in, looked around, and said, "I must have missed something." She pointed at a spot behind the trash can. I checked. There was nothing there. Still, I wiped it again. That became a pattern. She'd ask me to do things I had already done, then check them with a raised eyebrow. Dust the baseboards. Reorganize the pantry. Wash the sliding glass door. I did everything twice. Once because I wanted to be helpful, and again because she didn't think it was good enough the first time. There were other moments too. She'd walk into the room and wrinkle her nose. "Smells like mildew in here," she'd say, then light a candle. I'd sniff the air, but couldn't smell anything. Still, I opened a window. Just in case. She never called me by name. Not once. It was always her. Or someone. If Sharon asked who had folded the laundry, Heather would shrug and say someone did. If I was in the room, she wouldn't look at me. At dinner, she'd set the table for 4. Then remember me and bring out a smaller plate, one that didn't match the others. She'd say it was fine china and she didn't want me to feel nervous using it. I nodded and smiled even though I knew it came from the back of a cabinet no one touched. I tried to stay out of the way. I kept my things in the basement. I folded my blankets before anyone else woke up. I tiptoed past conversations and pretended I didn't hear the laughter from behind closed doors. Once I accidentally left a spoon in the sink overnight. The next morning, it was sitting on a napkin in the middle of the kitchen table. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Another time I made banana bread. It was something Edward used to love. I thought maybe they would too. Heather tasted a piece, smiled, and said it was dry. Then threw the rest in the trash before I could offer seconds. It wasn't about the bread. It was never about the bread. I told myself not to take it personally. I reminded myself that I was lucky to have a roof over my head. I told myself that these were just quirks. Just little misunderstandings. Just growing pains in a house that wasn't mine. But the truth is, it chipped away at me. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, like water wearing down stone. And the worst part wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't have to say. That I didn't belong. That I was an outsider in a place where everyone else had their role, their space, their seat at the table. I used to be someone. A wife, a mother, a teacher. I used to speak with confidence, laugh without checking the room first. Now I moved like a shadow. I cleaned like a ghost. And each day I thanked her. Because that's what you do when you think you're lucky to be tolerated. You smile when you're dismissed. You apologize when you're ignored. And you stay quiet when your heart breaks a little more each day. Some days, I wish the walls were thicker. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I just happened to be folding towels in the hallway when I heard Heather and her mother in the kitchen. They weren't whispering. They didn't need to. "She's still here," Sharon said. Heather sighed like my presence was a stain on her calendar. "What are we supposed to do? She has nowhere else to go." They laughed. Not cruelly, just casually. like I wasn't a person, like I was an unexpected rainstorm that ruined their picnic plans. It would be different if she contributed. But she just hangs around. She's 70, Sharon added. What can she really offer? I stood frozen, holding a towel like it was the last thread keeping me together. I wasn't 70. I was 65. I still had my mind, my health, my pride. But in their eyes, I was already fading. Heather said I was like charity, a favor they couldn't stop offering without looking heartless. I backed away before they saw me, went downstairs, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking, but I wouldn't let myself cry. Not this time. Because crying would mean they were right. So I took deep breaths and folded the towels again, just to feel like I had control over something. Later that week, I overheard them again. This time, it was about dinner. Heather said she was tired of cooking for 5 when only 4 contributed. Sharon suggested I could eat downstairs. Less mess that way. I never brought it up. Never asked. I just quietly started eating later after they were done. I took my plate to the basement and told myself it was more peaceful that way. At night, I could still hear them through the vents, talking about plans, vacations, shopping. My name never came up unless it was followed by a sigh, or a groan, or a complaint. Sometimes they'd say things loud enough for me to hear. Why doesn't she just go live in a nursing home? She's lucky we even let her stay. She's not family. She's just Brian's mother. I kept my routine. I woke up early. I cleaned before anyone asked. I smiled when spoken to. And when no one spoke, I smiled anyway. But inside, something was shifting. Not rage. Not yet. Just something quieter. Heavier. The kind of hurt that comes from being treated like a burden in the one place you hoped to feel safe. I didn't need praise. I didn't want pity. I just wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be something more than invisible. But each day I felt myself fading. And no matter how hard I held on, it was like the world around me had already let go. The floor was already clean. I had wiped it 3 times. On my knees, fingers raw from bleach, the scent burning into my nostrils. My back throbbed, but I didn't stop. She was watching. I could feel it, the weight of her stare pressing into my neck like a thumb on bruised fruit. I scrubbed one last time and sat back on my heels. My knees popped, my breath was shallow, but I was done. I thought I was done. Heather stepped forward, heels clicking on the tiles like punctuation marks. She looked down at me the way someone might look at a dog that had just tracked mud across their rug. Do it right this time. You missed a spot. She said it loudly, on purpose. The room went quiet for just a second, like a collective inhale. Then laughter broke through. Polite, awkward at first, but growing. People smiled over champagne. Some nudged each other, eyes wide, like they'd just been handed gossip wrapped in gold ribbon. I didn't look up. I didn't want to see their faces. I stared at the sponge in my hand, soaked and shriveled just like me. I started to reach for the bucket again. But before I could move, I felt it. Her hand. It came fast without warning, a clean open slap across my face. It cracked the air. My head jerked to the side. For a second, I didn't even understand what had happened. Then the sting settled in hot and sharp blooming across my cheek like fire under skin. I stayed still. Not because I was brave, because I couldn't move. My ears rang. My eyes burned. The room held its breath. And then it broke. Someone laughed. A short, surprised burst. Then another. Nervous chuckles. Murmurs. I heard a man whisper something about me being dramatic. Someone else said I probably deserved it. No one came to my side. Not one hand reached for me. Not one voice said enough. I blinked fast, refusing to let a single tear fall. My face burned not from the slap, but from the eyes. All of them. Looking down at me like I was nothing. I pressed my lips together and tried to remember how to breathe. Then I heard it. The front door opened. Slow. Steady. A breath of fresh air cutting through the suffocating heat of shame. Boots on wood. A duffel bag hit the floor. I knew that sound. Brian. I turned just my head, the rest of me still frozen on the floor. My heart jumped so hard it hurt. There he was. My son. My boy. He stood in the doorway, tall and strong in his uniform. His face was unreadable. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. His eyes scanned the room, the laughter still lingering like smoke. Then he saw me. On the floor. Red-faced. Knees dirty. Hands trembling around a sponge like it was the only thing anchoring me to this earth. His eyes darkened. His jaw clenched. He looked at Heather. She opened her mouth to explain, to spin, to lie. He didn't let her. What the hell is going on here? His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was calm, but it cracked the entire moment in half. Every face turned. Every glass paused midair. Heather stumbled over her words. Just a misunderstanding. We were joking. She was just helping. Brian didn't blink. I felt the room shift. Suddenly, I wasn't the only one who looked small. Heather's confidence wilted under his stare. He crossed the room, each step like thunder wrapped in silence. He knelt beside me. Gently, he took the sponge from my hand and set it down. You don't do this anymore. Not here. Not like this. My lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes found mine. I saw the hurt there. The anger. And something else. Guilt. He helped me up slow and careful, like I was made of glass. The room still watched, but no one said a word now. Not even Heather. I stood next to my son, weak but upright. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't alone. Brian looked at Heather again. Not with rage, but something colder. Something final. We'll talk later. Then he turned to me. Let's go. And just like that, I stepped out of that room. Not forgiven. Not healed. Not whole. But no longer on my knees. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked out. Brian wanted answers. He followed me down the porch steps, his voice filled with apology and rage and confusion. But I couldn't stop. Not yet. I needed to get away from that house, from those faces, from the weight pressing down on my chest. He offered to drive me somewhere, anywhere. I told him no. I needed space. I needed air. I needed silence. He said he'd make Heather apologize. Said he'd fix it. But there are things that don't get fixed with apologies. Some things need to be walked away from completely so you can remember who you are. At the corner of the street, I sat on a bench beside the bus stop. My hands were still trembling. The slap was long gone from my cheek, but not from my memory. That sting ran deeper than skin. I didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of strangers and concrete and the cold wind tugging at my coat. I just stared down the road and waited for a bus, though I didn't know where I was going yet. And then I remembered Helen. She and I used to teach together at the elementary school before I retired. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but in that moment, her name came to me like a thread tossed into water. I pulled out my old phone and called her. She answered on the second ring. Her voice cracked with surprise, then softened into warmth. I didn't explain much. I didn't have to. She just said, "Come by." She lived in a small house across town. Nothing fancy. Just enough room for one more. Helen didn't ask questions that night. She handed me tea and let me sleep in the guest room. I sank into that bed like it was the first real rest I'd had in weeks. The next morning, she brought up a job. Just part-time. Filing paperwork for a small insurance agency she worked with. Nothing glamorous. But it paid a little. And more importantly, it gave me a reason to get up again. I said yes before she finished the sentence. It felt strange at first. Clocking in, smiling at strangers, typing on dusty keyboards in a cramped little office. But each day the routine steadied me. I bought my own groceries, paid my share of rent, bought a second-hand winter coat that actually fit. Helen and I shared meals like old times. We laughed sometimes. I didn't talk about Heather or Brian. Not right away. Some wounds need time to stop bleeding before they can be spoken out loud. But slowly, the pieces of me that had felt lost started to come back. I reread books I'd once loved. I took long walks on Sunday mornings. I stopped flinching when the phone rang. I even opened a small savings account. $20 here, 10 there. Not much, but it was mine. And with each deposit, each small act of independence, I stitched myself back together. I didn't tell Brian where I was, not yet. He texted. He called. I read every message but never replied. I wasn't angry. I just needed space to grow into the woman I'd forgotten I could be. 6 months passed, and the quiet became my strength. I kept my head down and worked. The part-time job with Helen gave me structure, but it was never meant to be the end. One afternoon, while sorting a box of mailers for a local real estate firm, her agency partnered with I saw a listing that stopped me cold. It was for a building on West Elm Street. A multi-unit property. Nothing fancy, but I recognized the address. Apartment 3B. Heather's Place. I folded the flyer slowly and slid it into my purse. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, letting memories flicker behind my eyes. I wasn't angry. That had passed. What I felt now was sharper. Clean. Like the moment just before you make a decision, you already know you won't undo. I reached out to a contact from years ago. A woman named Darlene who had worked in title services when I was still helping run after-school programs. We hadn't spoken in ages, but she remembered me. Asked how I was. I told her I was looking for information. She gave me the name of the real estate investment group handling the sale. Nothing was finalized yet. The owner had fallen behind on maintenance. The building would be sold at a quiet discount, likely to someone with cash and no drama. I thanked her. Then I made another call. My younger sister Ruth had passed away a year before Edward. We'd been close once, then life drifted us apart. No children. No husband. Just her and her quiet little house, 2 states over. She left me everything. At the time, I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even opened the letter from the lawyer. But now I did. The inheritance wasn't huge, but it was enough. I called a financial advisor, opened a new account, and started forming the idea in real terms. I read about property management, LCs, passive income. I didn't sleep much that week, but it wasn't from worry. It was from purpose. I registered a limited liability company under a name no one would connect to me. Just a simple holding name. I didn't need recognition. I needed control. I made an offer. Clean. No contingencies. Cash. 3 weeks later, it was mine. No one knew. Not Helen. Not Brian. Certainly not Heather. I held the keys in my hand like they were something sacred. Not keys to revenge. Keys to a story I was going to rewrite. They thought I was gone, that I'd vanished into silence. But I wasn't gone. I was becoming the woman they forgot I could be. The first letter went out on a Tuesday. A standard notice. Rent adjustments due to rising maintenance costs. A request for updated lease terms to be signed within 30 days. It was polite, professional, and signed by a management company no one had ever heard of. Heather complained immediately. She stormed into the lobby waving the letter like it was a personal insult. She cornered the part-time super and demanded answers. He only shrugged, said he was just told to post the notices. That week, she sent 2 emails to the new ownership group. Both were ignored. By the second week, tenants started whispering. Some wondered if the building had been sold to some big company. Others said it was probably a developer trying to flip the units. Heather insisted they had no right. She said she knew people. Said she wouldn't stand for it. But the notices kept coming. One asked for proof of income. Another required inspection of all appliances for repair records. Then came the flyer. Tenant meeting. Thursday. Mandatory attendance. All units. Heather was livid. She printed emails, highlighted sentences, prepared her speech. That night, the building's community room filled with folding chairs and skeptical faces. Most just wanted to know who owned the place now. Heather arrived early. Took a front row seat. Arms crossed. Eyes narrowed. Ready for battle. Then I walked in. I didn't rush. I didn't smile. I just stepped inside holding the folder with every lease contract I now owned. People turned confused at first. Then they recognized me. Not all, but enough. Whispers spread like sparks. Heather turned, then froze. For a full second, she didn't speak. Then she laughed. That dry, uncertain kind of laugh people use when they're not sure if they're dreaming or drowning. I took my place at the front, set the folder down, looked her in the eye. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Someone asked politely who I was. I told them I was the new landlord. No one said a word. Heather sat back stunned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list grievances. I simply explained the changes. The new maintenance schedule. The improvements coming to the building. The adjustments in rent clearly stated in the lease. I answered questions. Took notes. Treated each tenant with fairness. Except Heather. I didn't address her directly. I didn't need to. The silence between us said everything. She was no longer the host, no longer the one with control. And I was no longer the woman on her knees with a sponge. I was the one holding the deed. When the meeting ended, she didn't move. I walked past her on my way out, calm, collected, in control. She followed me with her eyes, but said nothing. Because what do you say to the woman you tried to break when she ends up owning the building you live in? Heather showed up at my office the next morning. She didn't knock. She pushed through the door like she still had permission to do that kind of thing. Her hair was perfect, but her face was pale. She looked like someone who'd just discovered the ground under her wasn't hers anymore. She said my name like a question. Grace? I looked up from the paperwork and nodded. Yes, yes. She stood there for a moment, waiting for me to rise. I didn't. I motioned to the chair across from me. She sat down like it offended her. Then she started talking. First came the questions. How, when, why? Then the panic. She mentioned Rent Her Family Brian. She said this had to be some kind of mistake, that I couldn't really own the place. I listened, calm, patient. When she was done, I said the only thing I needed to. This is not revenge, Heather. It's real estate. She blinked. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. There was nothing left for her to say. She stood up and walked out without looking back. That night, Brian came to see me. He'd heard everything. He said he'd suspected something after the meeting. Said Heather had come home in tears, not anger. Just silence. He asked if it was true. I said yes. Then he said he was proud of me. I hadn't expected that. He told me he was leaving her. Said it without trauma, without spite. He'd tried to make excuses for her before. Told himself it wasn't that bad. That maybe I'd misunderstood. But now he saw it for what it was. And it was too much to ignore. He said he wanted to rebuild a real relationship with me. Not as someone to protect, but someone to respect. I cried then, quietly. Not because I needed him, but because it felt good to be seen again. The building continued to run smoothly. I kept it clean, fair, safe. I didn't evict anyone without cause. I didn't raise the rent more than needed. I just made it better. Quietly. Consistently. One afternoon, I wrote a check to a foundation that supports older women facing housing insecurity. I added a note that said, in memory of Ruth and every woman who was ever told to be grateful for crumbs. Then I opened a small scholarship fund in Edward's name for young men who wanted to serve their communities after military duty, the way he once did. My life didn't suddenly become perfect. I still missed my husband every morning. I still made my tea the way he liked it out of habit. I still caught myself looking for him in crowds. But I was whole again. Not because of money. Not because I owned a building. Because I had built something lasting. Something true. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't fought. I had endured. And then I had moved forward. They thought I needed shelter. What I really needed was respect. And I built it brick by brick.